Well, welcome back to NewsNation Now. You just saw President Biden speaking live in the state of Arizona. You know, the speech, as you heard, was about this idea of protecting democracy, right? But while the president was in that state, in Arizona, a fair amount of criticism came his way for not making a stop at the southern border while he was in the state, right? So right now we want to address that part of the story and the immigration debate that's been happening in the Congress. As Congressman Dan Crenshaw joins us, Republican from the state of Texas. And Congressman Crenshaw, it's good to see you. And I know you've done a lot of work on immigration. You have a task force that you're heading up in the Congress, taking on the Mexican drug cartels and looking into what they have been doing. Your thoughts on President Biden, though, and the criticism, as I said, that's come in that he did not visit the border when he was in Arizona today.
He wants to pretend that this crisis that he created doesn't exist. He knows it's a political liability. Most Americans want a secure border. The vast majority of Americans don't believe that you should have over 2 million people crossing just this year illegally across our southern border. He knows it's an unpopular issue. He doesn't want to talk about it. And it takes a lot of balls to go to Arizona, a border state, and not visit the border, not talk about this issue. You know, it really shows you something when he's talking about the institutions of democracy and the Constitution. Well, let me tell you, one part of that Constitution says that the executive branch is supposed to execute the laws of the land, and he is deliberately not executing the laws of the land by allowing this illegal parole system, which basically his administration has instituted, which allows millions of people to cross, and it creates that magnet for everyone to cross. That's an unsustainable prospect. It's unsustainable for our democracy and for our institutions, those very things that he was talking about in his speech.
Let me talk to you a little bit about that task force that you're involved in and what you guys are actually doing on this issue. As I do so, we'll bring up a tweet that you put out saying yesterday I had the honor of hosting the president of Ecuador to brief our congressional task force to combat the Mexican drug cartels. The task force has been tapped to holistically analyze cartel operations and destroy them. So what have you learned in your analysis, and how far are we moving along the line to trying to destroy them? What have you come up with?
Well, it's a long conversation. Look, the Mexican drug cartels are the most powerful in the world. Their reach is across the region, so that's why we had the president of Ecuador come address us and talk to us about how it affects Ecuador. The task force is supposed to be traveling to Colombia next week to get some lessons learned. I mean, Mexico is in where Colombia was 30 years ago. There's a lot of lessons to be learned from Colombia and how they dealt with their issues with the cartels and then the guerrilla insurgencies. I've traveled all over the region. I'm taking the task force all over the region over the next couple of months. Look, what we need is much better and more public cooperation between the U.S. military and the Mexican military. I'm accused a lot of saying I want to invade Mexico. That's nonsense. We want to work with the Mexican government, and we want to take the fight to the Mexican cartels that are killing Mexicans on a daily basis.
But you want to use the military, our United States military, more on the border. That part is true, right?
They wouldn't be so useful on the border. I want them to work hand in glove with the Mexican military.
In Mexico.
We do this all over the world. Yeah, I want them, whether it's training, equipping. Look, we need to talk. The Mexican government has to allow it. We have these kind of cooperation agreements all over the world. This is very normal in Colombia, for instance, where we have a persistent presence of special forces that constantly are working with the Colombians on a constant basis. They're always there. We have nothing like that in Mexico, and Mexico is supposed to be our greatest ally. I mean, they're at our southern border. I tell people, if you could choose one country in the world and you would make it 10 times safer and 10 times better, and it couldn't be your own country, which country would you choose? It would be Mexico. They should be our best friend. We should want them to be prosperous and safe, and they should want that help from us. You know, they are fighting the cartels. They have military units that fight the cartels, but they don't have the resources they need. We need them to ask us for those resources, and we should be willing to give them.
One other issue, Congressman, if I may, while you're here.
That sends a message.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Finish your thought.
I was saying that, yeah, that sends a message to the cartels that they've crossed the line with killing Americans with fentanyl. That's the point. That's why I want it to be overt military relationships. The
other issue is related to the military that I wanted to get your perspective on, partially because President Biden just brought it up in his speech. I know you're a former Navy SEAL yourself, and we had Senator Tommy Tuberville on this program earlier in the week talking about this holdup he's putting on the military promotions. Let me play a little bit of what he had to say, and I do want to ask you about that. Here's Senator Tuberville from earlier in the week.
I'm going to do it the right way. I'm going to make sure that we do these noms the right way. We're not going to give in. All we have to do is move this
how long are you
policy
willing to
back
go on with
the way
this?
it was, and we get them all. We'll get them all done.
So you're willing to
forever.
go all
I'm
the way
not
with
giving in.
this?
I've already told him that.
So his basic point was like, listen, because he's willing to keep this going forever. He's willing to go on as long as it, quote unquote, takes. Now, President Biden's speech moments ago, he said something to the effect of, oh, you got this one guy from Alabama holding this up. Your perspective, I know, as, again, a former member of the military, on these promotions being held up for political reasons.
Well, it's for a policy reason. I agree with Tuberville's policy reasoning. Now, in the House, we did it the right way. We put an amendment into the NDAA that does exactly what he wants, okay, which is prohibits funding for abortion in the DOD. I'm with him on that, right? I'm against abortion. However, I do not like the way he's going about this, because he is taking that fight to the wrong people. He is punishing service members who have nothing to do with this policy. These are not policymakers. These are war fighters. Now, he lost me. He lost me on his position when he wrote an op-ed for the liberal Washington Post and said in his op-ed that he's not harming the real war fighters. He's harming, the top brass. I might explain to Coach Tuberville that the people up for these promotions 20, 30 years into their careers were indeed the war fighters when there was a real war. And so I take real offense to that. A lot of these people are Purple Heart recipients, Bronze Star with Valor recipients, Silver Star recipients, and you're telling the American people that they're nobodies, that they're just not real war fighters.
Right.
And here's the other thing: it actually does affect. It's like a traffic jam. You can't promote at the top. Well, you can't promote at the bottom either. There are military families that can't get the orders they need. There are military spouses that can't get approved for jobs that they need. They've lost jobs because they thought they were transferring. There's a lot of effects to this that he's not taking into account. He's making it very personal against them when they have nothing to do with the policy that I agree with him on.
Right.
But there's a right way to legislate, and you got to do it the right way.
Right. So you agree with him on the policy, disagree with him on the methods. Congressman Crenshaw, it's good to see you. Thank you for coming on, and we'll stay on top of the immigration story as well. Thanks for joining us today.